Hello, and welcome to the Christian Marriage Podcast, the only podcast on Christian marriage that I host. I'm Nick. I am so glad that you are here with us. On this podcast, I interview Christian couples about a time in their marriage where something was hard, so that you can connect with their struggle, see what was helpful for them, and how God helped them through it. I only interview couples who come recommended as having a marriage full of Christian love and grace, so that you can have confidence in the wisdom that these couples drop on you. In this episode, I am talking to Julie and Scott. They live in Citrus Heights, California. They have been married for 33 and a half years. Julie's favorite thing about Scott is that he is wise, godly. He's a provider and a spiritual leader. And Scott's favorite thing about Julie is that she is a gatherer of people and she cares about people deeply. In this episode, we are going to talk about how different Scott and Julie are, and how they went through a period of time where it felt like they just were different people and didn't have anything in common. The thing that stuck out most about this conversation is that they talked deeply about some incredibly foundational ideas and theological beliefs that helped them transition from, this feels bad, feeling disconnected, and I'm not sure if we're even compatible. It helped them go from there to, I am going to pursue my spouse come what may. Those truths that helped them make that transition, we're going to talk a lot about them so that you can question yourself. Are you living in these kinds of truths, or are you living in some other kinds of truths? So I think you're going to be really helped by this. I was really encouraged, so let's dive in. Scott, Julie, I'm so excited that you're able to join me on the Christian Marriage Podcast. We're going to talk about your journey in just not having much in common, which is something that I hear from a lot of couples that I work with, actually, that they're like, we just can't do anything together. We don't have anything in common. We don't have any, interest. She hates what I like. I can't stand what she likes. We don't want to do anything together, right? And it's this deep kind of frustration. So I'm really excited to just talk about your guys' journey and how you came to love and appreciate each other and make it work, right? Just to make it work. So why don't you tell me about, at the beginning of, I assume in your start in dating life, you probably felt like you had more in common then. What was that like until you started, you get married, you start figuring out, what do we have in common? Like, tell me about that phase.
Well, we met in March of 1990 and we got married in December of 1990. So we didn't really know each other. And part of that was long distance. You were in Enumclaw, Washington, and we were writing letters back in the day when there was no email. We were writing physical letters. So we weren't really living in the same town very long at all when we got married. So I think it was kind of a surprise to us that we're like, wow, I don't like doing that. And I don't like doing that. I think we have our faith in common and we really were deeply in love with each other. But as far as like hobbies and interests, I think we found that out as we were married. Would you say that's true?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would think too that I was saying a little bit earlier how I kind of came out of a rather liberal Christian background with some really strong, not just strong and competent women, but feminist women. And again, I'm not against feminism itself, but it's the strong man hater type feminism. So, and it was at that time of our history, our culture, and I met quite a few of them. So when I first met Julie, she was this complete fresh air, this breath of fresh air, this cool drink of water that was not like many of the the older women and then the girls that I dated, and I felt immediately drawn to her, even though in our external, outside activities, there wasn't a lot of common ground.
She was, you saying
It
Julie
was who
is
she
from
was
this.
inside and how she felt about herself and how she felt about marriage, and that was so affirming to me that I felt drawn to that, attracted to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. But really, she was. You were saying she's from a more kind of traditional background, and so for you, it was kind of a culture shift. I think is what you're saying.
It was, and that proved to be a little bit of difficulty when we were first dating, and all the way in maybe 10, 15 years
Yeah.
into marriage was I was, expecting to treat her like I had grown up in my own family with strong women and not opening doors and not pulling out chairs and really not even trying to provide any sort of security or safety. Just like, you're gonna get that argument, you go get them, girl. You do your thing. I'll just watch. And I didn't realize that was what she wanted, and I was constantly pushing her buttons and kind of making her feel uncomfortable with my lack of interest in her safety and in her care.
And I didn't realize how sheltered I think that I was. I didn't put gas in my car until I was like 20 because my dad did it every Sunday. He would take all of our cars and fill them up with gas and check my tires and all of those things. So I had expectations that I didn't even know were there. And I would be secretly frustrated, like, why is my car empty on gas? Why has no one checked my tires? Like, in my mind, that was a boy job. And I didn't know that I had all of those preconceived expectations. And that was really difficult because you don't know what you don't know. So
Right. Yeah. You don't whenever you get. A lot of the premarital work with couples that I do, I tell them, like, you don't even know the questions that you have at this
right.
point. And yeah, and you were talking about, well, both of you are saying, this is how you had this idea of, like, this is how I treat a woman, or this is how a man treats a woman. And you had those kind of just different expectations based on
Absolutely.
what the examples you saw.
Yeah, I think I like doing those things. So once she gave me the freedom to do it and the knowledge that this is actually honoring her, and I'm not taking something away from her, I'm not diminishing her by saying, hey, can I get gas in the car? Can I check your tires? Can I take over that sort of responsibility? Then I felt honored by being able to do it, that I felt encouraged and empowered to do that myself, where I was of the mindset, oh, she can take care of these things. She's a woman. She's.
And I do know, I did just put gas in my car today. Like, I know how to do it and I don't mind doing it. And I feel like I've also evolved in the sense that there are things I enjoy taking care of myself and not needing somebody to, but I certainly feel cared for when he is looking out for that. I remember being out really late one night, and I want to say we'd only been married a year. And I was out with a friend, and it was like 2 a.m. And I got home, and he was asleep, and I was horrified because my dad always waited up until I got home. And he was like, I figured you were fine. So it's like learning to realize it doesn't mean he doesn't love me. It means he's not worried, and it's a different value.
He believes in you.
Yeah, I'm capable.
Or at very least, kind of didn't want to offend. Didn't want to offend the woman or the feminist.
Yes,
kind of.
Absolutely.
So it was talking. That was the
Yeah.
key. It was sharing, being self-reflective enough for me to say, this was what motivated that. And then she says, be able to say, well, this is what motivated that, and be able to talk about it. And I think at the bottom end, not to look at that and say skeptically, well, I don't really like that about you. It's more like, oh,
I didn't
that
know
is
that.
a wonderful part of you. Let me include that in what I love about you. So Julie has this great thing she'll write on the bottom of cards at
for bridal
showers and things as advice to give to younger girls, which married couples even, but to not consider that things are
to try and find things instead of finding it annoying, to find it endearing. And that has served
So
me very well. Like, I'm just going to say, "Aw, that's just Scott," instead of feeling annoyed by it. That's just who he is.
Wow.
Yeah, I
part of
find it
that part
endearing.
of that is her saying, I'm not doing it intentionally to push
Yeah.
her buttons. I'm doing it because that's sort of naturally how I am choosing to love her.
Hmm.
And that even if she's not receiving it, like it's going over her head as I'm trying to honor her, uh, she can tell me and I'll get better and I'll, do it right. But
Mm.
that initially, until that's discussed, and even as I'm trying to work it out, like how often and to what degree, and there are certain times where she's driving in certain areas where she may want me to stay up, but there's other times
Yeah.
where she's just out with a friend, and they're only going to be back by 10. Then it's okay for me if I need to get
Hmm.
up early the next morning. So it's parsing that out to where we know much more about how the other one's feeling.
And you
Yeah.
said the important bit in navigating some of that kind of stuff is being able to talk about each other's motives and why you have this desire. Oh, my husband didn't stay up, and you feel a little bit offended, and it's like, well, I didn't even know I had that desire, and I didn't even realize I would be offended by the fact that he
Mm-hmm.
didn't. But being able to articulate what that means to you, or being able to articulate something, and being able, what you said, Scott, being able to receive that makes all the difference in the world, because you can actually begin to understand, begin to change, begin to have compassion on each other, I think is what you're saying.
If my goal is to love her, then to find out how she receives that is much more important than me trying to determine whether my motive is a loving motive or not. Because I could be trying to do all sorts of things to encourage and support, and maybe even the word would be to push her and challenge her out of a sense of love for her. But if she's just feeling, you know, either ignored or over criticized
Push, yeah.
or uncomfortable, then all my efforts to love isn't helping at all. It's not.
Right. And I
I would
I
say
think
conversely, though, it's like you realizing that, but me on the other end saying, I can point to many times where he has frustrated me. I can point to 0 times where his motive has been to hurt me. Like, his motive has
mm,
always been because he loves me. Whether or not that's how it's coming out, I can always ease any anger or frustration by realizing he's never intended to hurt me, that I cannot point to a time. So I think it's both of us kind of coming at it with what you said and then with how I receive it.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that Julie's a very social and embracing and loving person, and sometimes I'm going, but what about me? You've
Mm-hmm.
got, you're
mm,
going here and here and here, and you're helping this person, and we're going to interrupt this TV show we were watching, and we set aside because I've got this text coming in, and I got to call so and so,
That just happened last night.
you know, and
That's
part of
true.
that is me having to question, okay, do you love these other people more than me? Am I just a strengthening reinforcement bar who provides some money and some, am I a person, or am I more of a tool that you use to help
Mm-hmm.
further these other relationships? Um,
right.
and it's getting to the point where I can communicate my sense of, hey, I don't feel like I'm getting paid enough attention to. I need a little more. But then also to reflect and say, but I know she loves me, and I know
Yeah.
that in reality, this is a compliment. On the one hand, that she feels like I'm capable of handling this sort of
Yeah.
distancing, knowing that she will return when the situation happens. We were also taking care of her dad at the last stages of his life,
Mm,
up until
2 years
two
ago.
years ago. And so
yeah.
there was a lot of emotional, and she was going through a job change, and she was going through the moving of our grandkids and our kids away from us and back to us. So there
A
was
lot
a
going
lot of
on.
other things going on in her social, and I did feel very much like I was some kind of a crutch or some kind of a
Way down on the list.
yeah, like number
Yeah.
five on
Not
the list.
prioritized.
Yeah. But I was able to communicate that with her, and she was able to hear it, and that really helped.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Being able, I think what's sticking out to me is coming in. You first of all, you didn't have a whole lot of time together, like before marriage, to really like get to know each other a lot, and so you were largely kind of learning on the fly. And one of the things you're learning in this sort of initial phase of marriage was, man, we're more different than we thought we were.
For sure.
And the way that so far you're saying that was a foundational piece to get you through that was, I actually I'm going to choose to treat your differences as just something that's different instead of something that's offensive, or I'm going to choose to focus on your motive because instead of the thing that offends me. And you know, I think that has almost direct like correlation to, it sounds like you had to do that process even in finding things that you have in common and things that interest both of you, and to accept the other person's interest and to maybe lay aside like what you would want was an application of that, I think is what you're saying.
I would even say too. You said that it was different. When you notice these differences that you notice are different. I would say that they are good, that they are appropriate, that they are a an alternative that is equally as valuable. So they're valuable. So let's say, for instance, I like to work outside until the sun goes down, doing something in the yard or building something or whatever. And Julie really likes to, after dinner, maybe take a walk and then watch some TV. And for years, I did not want to watch TV. That TV was one of, I thought.
You didn't want us to have one in the house, I think, for a while. I was like, oh, no.
Now we've got like 5. But no, it was a change. It was to say, even though I don't appreciate that on my own, it is valuable and it is good. And the fact that you like that is not something that I can criticize or make fun of. It's something that I need to embrace about you and see that that's part of the woman that God made her. And as she changes, then I can accept those things too. But if they're not a change away from, that sort of thing, then I embrace it as being good and part of who she is.
Yeah, that's great. Differences are not just different. They're not just neutral, but they are actually good. Mm-hmm. I've talked with couples about, part of my story with Sandy is that I was having like cold feet and everything like before marriage, and I just happened to be reading through 1 Corinthians, and then you get to 1 Corinthians 13, and you realize that the love chapter is written to address differences that were talked about in 1 Corinthians 12. And so it's like, how do you be different? And Paul's answer was, you love each other. And that was so helpful for me to say, okay, you know what? I can, if that's what it takes, like I think there's this assumption, I don't know where it comes from, that we have to be this like almost the same, or else we're just going to fall apart. But if you are the same, it feels now, to whatever, almost 12 years into marriage, now it feels like if we were the same, we would be way more fragile. Looking back on it, but that's not how it feels. Kind of, in the beginning, it feels like you need to be very the same. So tell me this: what was it like realizing there was this period where you realized, oh, we don't have as much in common as we thought we did. What was the hardest part of that?
The thing that was just coming to my mind was how we addressed parenting. We have 5 biological kids, 2 twins at the end. They're all relatively close in age. And Julie's approach to discipline and parenting was very different than mine. And at first, I would say, you're not doing it my way, so it must be wrong. And I think, even though she probably didn't say it, I don't remember her saying it, in her head it was, yeah, but you're
being
pushing,
mean.
You're pushing them too hard. You're expecting too much. And I'm thinking, you're coddling them. You're not giving, anyway, it got to the point where I realized there is such value in the way she parents. it's different than me, but it's right for our kids at so many different points in their life, that I had to admit I probably overextended myself to try to compensate when I should have just been letting her do her thing because it was right, and
Mm.
then still doing my thing because it was
It was
right.
also right.
And it's okay, yeah, that I was being genuine to my own love for my kids, and I needed to see that the way she was parenting was also genuine and right. So I
Mm.
guess that's the point, is to say that differences are stronger. Like denominations, I think some people say, "Oh, that's the breaking up of the church." Well, I think they're stronger for it. It's that
Mm.
there are some muscles in the body that extend and some that contract and some are in opposition, but that's what makes the body strong. So I think when I
Yeah.
appreciate the truth and the genuineness and the correctness of her activities and behavior that are different than mine, it's so easy to go, yeah, this, I love watching it. I love seeing how it benefits and honors our children, or how it improves our way of life, or how, in ways that I would never be able to accomplish because I'm, more tracked in a different way.
I'd say for me, so we got married pretty quickly after meeting. And then I was pregnant 14 months later, so sooner than we'd planned. So I would
Mm-hmm.
say we jumped into parenting even pretty quickly too, and we were deep in the throes of it because our oldest was 5.5 when our twins were born, the youngest. So we had 5 kids that were 6 and younger, and so we were just surviving. Like we were just in new parent mode.
Yeah.
So we didn't have time for hobbies or extracurricular. There was nothing. We were just in it. So for me, I would say right around when our youngest were about 3, and that's when my mom passed away, and I was going through a lot of grief,
Mm.
and Scott was struggling to know how to support me.
When is
Yeah,
it done?
yeah, he
When's
was
this grief
struggling to
over?
like, oh no, when is she going to get her sparkle back? So I would say,
Yeah.
gosh, maybe even a decade into our marriage where we're kind of coming up for some air and realizing, wow, we don't have a lot in common. We've just been raising a family and
Mm.
surviving. And I would say my first feeling was one of disappointment, feeling like
Okay.
I don't know that we have a lot. Like, what are we going to do together? And
Yeah.
so we
The kids
sought
at
out.
this point, the kids were older. They were sort of more self-sufficient. You'd been
Yeah.
sort of, you had bit like the thing that brought you together was just surviving,
Yep.
which is very like it that will bind people together.
Yeah.
But then it was you sort of came out of the fog and it's like, wait a minute.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's when I was going back to work. And so we were trying to figure out role division. Like it was all starting to look very different. And we went to marriage counseling, and that was super helpful. I remember we went a few times, and the big aha was, okay, you like this, I like this. What teeny tiny part of our Venn diagram overlap do we have in common? And let's
Hmm.
pull those things out. I like to go for a walk. Well, I don't mind going for a walk. Let's go for walks. Let's, he really liked games. I wasn't a big game player, but what board games could we play? And I remember after a few sessions, we were like, counseling's great, but it's really expensive. Maybe we should just spend some money on buying board games and trying to figure out some things we would like to do. And that was really helpful. I think
Hmm.
just, and not putting too much pressure on having to like everything the other one liked, but what are a few things that we could focus on? And because the important part was that we were spending time together and trying to show that we valued the other person. It didn't have to be 15 things in common. It could be a couple, and investing in that.
Yeah, we didn't have to like everything each other liked.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because you have that assumption, right?
Right.
Why do you think? Where for you as you think about it, where did that come from? I had it too, but why do we assume that we need to like everything that the other person is interested in,
It's
or
because
else
you're
our
the
relationship
star of
is
your
gonna?
life, right? You're like, you're the
Okay, yeah,
star. And then all of a sudden you get married and have kids, and it brings out all these character flaws you didn't know were there because suddenly you have to think about somebody else and not just yourself.
yeah,
And it doesn't occur to you in your self focusedness that somebody else is going to be really different.
Yeah, and if I like playing role-playing games and long extended strategy board games because I like it. Well, clearly anybody who is
It must be
reasonable
awesome.
must also like it.
Yeah.
It was another way that I like to talk. I mean, I was telling you, I looked at my brother earlier. He and I grew up just arguing about
Yeah.
tiny little nothings because we enjoyed the banter, we enjoyed the give and take, and then we could here dinner time. All right, it's gone, and now we're sitting down telling jokes at the dinner table.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
there's no carryover. So I loved that dialogue. I love that kind of
It's
challenge.
super fun at Thanksgiving. not they'll get going like and bantering or not like or debating, and it feels contentious, and I will actually physically have to say I'm uncomfortable, and I'll get up and go leave the room. It's just too much.
But it's also then, like she mentioned her mom passing, and I had trouble. I accepted grief, but then I said, but there's got to be a cap, a time limit, and I've got to set that time limit. And so in my own head, I was thinking, come on, you got to get over this. But part of this counseling and then part of deeper reflection was, but that is how and the appropriate and the right way for her to be dealing with this loss. It's not me dealing with the loss of her mom. I was over that pretty quickly. I mean, I loved her, but it was not my mom, and it was not my life now having this huge hole in it. So it was, again, recognizing that how she is responding is right and good and something that I can support. If I can throw another scriptural verse, Paul's admonition in Ephesians 5, where he tells husbands to present their wives like a bride, like the church as a bride, without stain, without wrinkle. I had to think, okay, how am I staining my wife? Or how am I wrinkling, or how am I blemishing by my own actions that, but even more than that, like the death of her mom, how has life blemished or wrinkled her? And how can I help remove that blemish or straighten that wrinkle? Because I think that's my job, is to see the value of it and be able to respond by either not causing more wrinkling, or at least, or then smoothing out what might already be there. So
Yeah.
it's a metaphor, obviously, that Paul's using. So each one of us are going to see something slightly different in the sense of what's a stain and what's a wrinkle and what's a blemish.
Yeah.
But it's really spending time thinking about, okay, how is my behavior and my thinking blemishing, staining, or wrinkling my wife?
Yeah. Let me go back to, you'd mentioned parenting as kind of an example of how this really kind of came out. Your differences and just not having, not being completely lined up, right? What was it? What helped you transition from something where what the other person was doing felt even mean, or felt, you're going to, right? Like some level of like, I think what you're doing is going to ruin the kids. Like that's really where it goes, right? And like very threatening if you think about it. And we feel that. Okay, so what helped you go from this feels very threatening and / wrong to, you know what? There is more good here that I can accept than there is threat. What helped you go to that make that transition?
I would say that happened a little bit later than
Yeah.
I mean, I would say for most of the time they were in like that school age, sort of what I term the family years, when we're all here and carpooling and all of that. For me, I think it lasted a long time where we were at odds. So it was an ongoing frustration and tension that lasted longer than I would have liked. I think that both of us would have liked, because then we tried to balance each other out. So he'd go farther. It's like we became polarities of it in trying to balance each other out, instead of just like what he said, can you just be you and I be me? We were like, oh, like this. So
Yes.
I was under the incorrect assumption. So it goes all the way back to the birth of our kids, because I was under the assumption that these kids are going to be born sort of like as blank slates, and I get to sort of write my character in them, train them up in the way they should go, and they won't depart from it.
Yeah, sure.
But really, God had his own plan on each one of those kids, and they were already who they were. And it was our job to really just discover it as opposed to try to
kind of
shape it and
steward
mold
them.
it. And that was a huge shift for me.
Good point.
That was a whole huge shift. It's great now as a grandpa. But,
For sure.
that it took that time. So Julie's absolutely right that during those formative years, that was when it happened. But then as they started to become 14, 15, 16, and they started reflecting on their own childhood and what they want to be as a parent, I saw how much they loved their mom. I saw how much they wanted her to hear about their life and about their stories. And I said, she had to have been doing it right. And yet, on the other hand, I saw my kids, towing the line with work and with, with their own moral character and with their own sense of honesty and integrity, which I don't think she was against that, but I think those were the things I was stressing. And I started to see the effect of that in their lives. And again, they could have been that way because God made them that way and I had very little to do with it. But I saw for her sake their incredible response to the love and compassion they have for their moms, which means, and who they are as children now in their early 30s, the late 20s to early 30s.
They're like 26 to 32 or their ages
who
now.
they've become. And I think that's, a huge part on how their mom raised them. So I see the benefit now. Not that I didn't see it then. I just thought, oh, she said, I've got to overcome this. I got to compensate for it,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's helpful in general. Like what you're saying is, well, we had to give it enough time to actually get perspective on these feelings that we were having. And given enough time, you were able to look and say, oh, there was a lot of good fruit from my spouse's emphasis, which, I probably wouldn't have guessed would have been there.
I also spent some time self-reflecting on my own interactions. And I remember I wanted my kids to sort of respect me. That was the main thing, more than like me. And so a lot of times when we would put them on a timeout, then I would go back and I would solve their problem. If it was my two older boys and they were arguing, I would use my adult perspective and solve the problem for them and then tell them, you need to apologize, whatever, rather than opening the door to say, have you guys figured it out yet? Not yet? Okay, you're back here until you do. Because I think to one way that, as I've reflected on a limitation of my own parenting, was I didn't give my kids enough skills in relational, figuring things out on their own relationally, or when they're arguing. It's more like I gave them the answer instead of letting them give them the answer I thought was right.
I mean, it's so much easier that way. So
right,
because then we can play games.
Yeah.
we can get back to debating, the important things in the world instead of arguing, right? No, that's good. Julie, did you have anything to add?
With regards to that, when I talk about regrets, and I try not to have a lot of regrets, but truthfully, I do when I look back on it. And I know we can all say we were doing the best we could. Like, if I knew then what I know now, I would have been a much better partner early on in our marriage. I would have been a more present and intentional parent. But I was who I was then, and the same could be said for now. So I guess trying not to wish it away, whatever it is I have right now, and trying to not have regrets, but to just move forward with what I know now is probably my biggest challenge, but I think where I'm trying to head.
Yeah. Trying not to get bogged down in the regrets, but learn from it and move forward with the wisdom that you've gained.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of
If I was to reflect on any kind of mistake I thought I had made, one of the consistent and kind of over time, long term, was that I would often try to fix whatever emotionally or whatever was upsetting Julie during the day rather than just being a listening partner. And I think by trying to fix it, that was part of what let her believe that I didn't think she was capable, because like she would offer what was troubling her, and then I would try to fix it and make her think, well, I can figure that out. I know I can. And I thought I was being a help. So we got to the point where I can say, is this something you would just like me to listen to and affirm that, yeah, that's tough stuff. That's a hard situation to be in. I can imagine that, especially as to how you're made inside, that must have really hurt, that to hear that person or whatever. Or then say, do you want me to try to fix this? Not that I have all the answers, but then that way where both of our heads are working together to try to fix this situation rather than just, yeah, wow, that's a hard place. I'm glad I'm not having to go through that.
Yeah, that's good.
Is there anything I can do to help?
And trying to, basically you're saying we have to be able to communicate and kind of, I think the term is like hold space for each other.
Yeah.
To just allow each other to be and actually be with that person in where they are, I think is like a metaphor for what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought the side effect though was that it made her feel as though I didn't respect her. Mm-hmm. Here I'm trying to fix it because I do honor and want to love her. But
that's interesting, yeah.
By trying to fix it, it was like me saying, and I don't think you can, so you need me to do that. And that was a diminishing.
Yeah.
Even from your kind of strong feminist background.
Usually it was like, well, you go get him. Don't let him talk to you like that. It wasn't like, I'll talk to him.
And I'm so non-confrontational. It was like, great, thanks for the advice. I won't be doing that.
Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah. And okay, so yeah, there's kind of summarizing in general, you realize you went through the process of realizing, oh, we're not actually all that similar. And you had to figure out how to love someone who was different than you. And it sounds like what you found is, well, we got to communicate about this. We can't assume that we know what's in each other's heart. We can't assume that we know how they want to be helped. We have to get in there with each other and talk about what's on your heart, what's your motivations, what do you want, what do you need, how can I help, and kind of not have it out, but talk it through, be actually with each other instead of sort of focused on like the next thing. So, okay, so let me go to...
If I could connect it back. Yeah. Sorry, were you going to go on?
Yeah, he's going to do that.
I was, but what you were going to...
This should be quick. Connect it back to one of the metaphors I said earlier about how marriage is sort of like a mission field. There are, I'm sure, some missionaries who go into the mission field to a third world country and feel superior, like they're bringing some sort of rightness with them, and that they have a little bit of a lower opinion, perhaps, of the people they're serving, which is weird to serve people who you have a low opinion of. But the idea being that really the most effective missionaries are the ones who get into life with those people, respect them and view them the same way that God sees them, that there's no difference, that maybe they have a different color of skin, or they have a different language they speak, or a different cultural background, but their differences are not less. Their differences are are wonderful and are good. And I think that goes to that whole mission field of that my wife is my mission field, and if I come in feeling I'm superior and I'm going to try to change her into the woman that I want her to be, that is absolutely the wrong position to be in. So it's discovering who she is and rejoicing in the wonder of what that is.
And the actual uniqueness.
And the beauty,
Not, which is, sometimes I really find it tough, right? Especially whenever there's something that does annoy you uniquely about your spouse. It can be very hard to see something as different or unique and choose to like look at it close enough and carefully enough until you see the beauty in it. And it's a choice like you can't, anybody can choose to do that. But it's a choice, and it sometimes is work, right?
Yeah, and I'll share this. I have a very poor sense of smell, so you can imagine there are numerous things in raising children, but also of men and women living together, where if I can't smell it, I I don't know it exists. I didn't know that it was there.
I come home and be like, "Did you change anybody's diaper?" Like the moment I walk in, yeah.
But it was I didn't know, and so that was an annoying thing about me. That she then let me know, and I can say, yeah, I can totally see why that's annoying.
Yeah.
So I had to be willing to embrace some of the things that I do that I know are annoying, even though I think kind of having a poor sense of smell is kind of cool. It's kept me in some jobs.
You choose to find it endearing.
Yeah. But anyway, the point is
about
I
himself.
Recognize
right.
that was an annoying thing, and I needed to do some things and make some changes in my own life in order to not be annoying when where I could make a small change and stop doing that.
Yeah. And you took it on, and importantly, you took that on yourself to make that change for the betterment of Julie and for your family. Yeah. But it was something that it didn't affect you either way, but I need to take it on to serve them. Yeah. Right. No, that's good. So you were, I think all of that is incredibly important foundation, I think, for, okay, then the kids get older and you sort of, your kids are a bit older now. I don't know if you're not empty nesters yet, are you?
No, our twins still live at home, but they're,
okay.
They're working full-time jobs and they're not really home a lot.
Yeah. So you're effectively empty nesters, and now you don't have anything to focus on kind of except each other in some way. But you have this foundation where you have built a life and learned how to, it's okay that we're different. It's actually a beautiful thing. And how can I move towards each other, even in our differences? So practically, like, how do you handle nowadays? How have you learned to handle that feeling of like, we don't have anything in common and we don't have the same interests and that kind of thing? Like, practically, how have you learned to handle that?
All right. Well, this one came, again, I'm going to bring up my brother, but he was the one that sort of taught us this, because he and his wife lead outdoor adventure expeditions, often rafting down the Colorado River and that sort of thing. And so when they do things together, they assign either he or his wife are the trip leader. And when she is trip leader, he doesn't make any sort of corrective comments. He just does whatever she says needs to be done. Pack this bag, get this here, arrive at this time, carry this here, do that. And then when he's trip leader, she does that for him. So when I was younger, before I met Julie, I would like to do lots of multi-day backpacks and be out in the wilderness. And as I got married and had kids, that part shrunk inside of me where I wasn't doing that. But
you weren't taking the twins to like multi-day backpacks and stuff?
He did go camping.
He did.
And we did.
Actually, I was pregnant with our second, with Ben, and he was about to leave on a backpacking trip. This is in 1994, so like we didn't have a cell phone. And I went into labor, and I remember you actually looked at me and you were like, should I not go on the trip? He was about to leave, and I'm like, no, you should not go on the trip. And then if he had, I would have had a baby, and he would have been home like 5-6 days later. Yeah. So I do remember that. Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. But my point is that as we've now, our kids have moved out, that sense of adventure or wanting to be out and do those things have come back. And it's in the back of my mind almost always as I'm teaching through the school year. It's like, okay, where am I going next? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I shared that with Julie, and she was not interested in being a multi-day backpacker or go out and do that sort of thing. She is much more of a fly to a destination and sip cocktails and see shows and, visit museums.
Makes me sound so terrible.
No, that's a beautiful thing.
Like, I like to be in God's creation. She wants a mocktail. No,
my point is that
I want to be in Vegas. Like, can we just go to Vegas?
Right.
Please.
No, I don't want Vegas.
My point is, as we plan vacations, she said, I said, okay, you're trip leader. and she gets to pick the destination
Yeah.
and what we're going to do and how we're going to get there. And then she has said, okay, you get to be trip leader. And we had a fantastic multi-day car trip visiting all the California
Almost
missions.
a month. We just went on in June.
This was the one last year.
Oh, last year.
But then this year we drove all across the United States to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. So we covered across the whole United States and back.
It was great.
24 days. And so we just kind of adapted the multi-day trip away from a backpack into a small car that carried all of our gear. And, we just traveled in a cooperative sort of kind of way, finding what we like. And anyway, my point is that she allowed me to be trip leader on this big one. And I, as trip leader, didn't just go, oh, what do I want? It was more like, okay, well, as trip leader, how can I honor and bless her? And so we went to Anna Green Gable's house on Prince Edward Island, which is her favorite, one of her favorite books. And all, and so it was seeing those kinds of things that were for her, and for me, obviously. There were things in there that were mine, but it was allowing the other person to be the trip leader and being an encouraging and supportive
follower.
Yeah. I think too, finding that we're both pretty busy at church and with our grandkids and that kind of thing, but it tends to be often Wednesday nights we don't have a lot of other commitments, so almost tacitly we sort of agreed. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, we have Wednesday nights open, and we usually save that to hang out together. And that can be watching a show, it can be playing a game, or going to Costco, whatever it is we decide we're going to do that night. And I almost feel like we sort of celebrate Wednesdays. So it doesn't have to be all the time, but to make the time to do it and to protect it and to sort of celebrate it. Like I'll say, "Ooh, it's Wednesday. We get to hang out together tonight." And we're both sort of aware of it. And it kind of builds that sort of excitement that like we get to hang out together. So I think that's important too, the celebration of it.
Yeah. Having something where you are like actually looking forward to it, and I mean a particular time where this is our together time.
Yeah.
And something to anticipate. Yeah. No, that's good. I like the trip leader. Yeah. That would be hard, I think. Yeah.
I think it's kind of freeing because it goes back and forth. And instead of feeling like I've just got to protect it because he's not going to take care of it, I feel like, oh, we each get a turn doing it. And that makes you want to think about the other person because you want them to think, she was a great trip leader on that. She made sure, or when he did it, trying to say, we did this as parents where you try to say yes as much as possible so that when you have to say no, it means something. I was personally determined on this month-long road trip to say yes whenever I could. And I think it worked out really well. And I didn't feel overextended because I think that he was so happy, it felt freer and he didn't have to push for things. It's amazing. Like less polarizing, I think.
Yeah. Right. Yes. I love that. No, that's really good. Cool. Well, so this has been a lot of fun. I'm sure we could go on forever. I'll let you boil it down into if someone is just feeling like, I don't even know if I know who my spouse is. I don't know if we have anything in common. What would you tell a person who's feeling that kind of frustration, that kind of worry? Like, will we be okay if we can't find anything in common? Like, if you could boil everything down into one piece of advice for that person, what would you say?
I would say it's not as daunting as it sounds to find things you can do together. And
because it can feel daunting.
It can feel like, oh, I made a terrible mistake. I was supposed to find somebody I had things in common with and I didn't. And oh no. And really, it's not that hard to find a few things. It doesn't have to be 10 things. It can be 2 things, and just do them well and celebrate them and recognize you have this much emotional energy and this much time, they're limited resources. And if you can just save a really good chunk of that for each other,
Mm.
that's, I think, more than half the battle. And then I would say the biggest thing I've tried, I think a lesson for me isn't, it's not a I win, you win. Like I got to do my thing, you got to do your thing.
Mm.
It's a win for Scott is a win for me because we are one. And so when
Wow.
he's flourishing and he's happy and doing well, that's a win for both of us. So I think
Yeah.
it serves you well personally when you can accommodate what your spouse wants to do.
I think Julie has always been good at that, and I think traditionally women are better at that, being able to sort of come alongside their husband and sort of move with their husband or follow their husband's career or whatever. Again, that's a
Yeah.
traditional role.
Sure.
And I would say to guys, you just got to get over yourself. You're not all of that. I mean, as much as you are supposed to be the leader in the relationship, that's the leader to bless your wife. That's to keep her unwrinkled, unblemished, unbruised. And it doesn't mean push her and pull her and stretch her until she's all bent out of shape just because of your, predilection or, that you don't want to show, I don't know, a feminine side or a compassionate side or a nurturing side, So I think typically men hold on to these social ideals. Maybe I'm, almost 60. And so I'm coming from a slightly different generation than what's coming up now. But people who are at my own age, I think they fight to hold on to a tough, unemotional demeanor, a mask, when in reality we don't. That's not the truth behind us. That's not really what's going on underneath, and that we need to be able to share things like learning the value of our spouse and what they like to do, and enjoy shopping and enjoy fine things. Obviously, we all need to eat, so why not enjoy figuring out what you like to eat and going to different restaurants? And I mean, it's just, again, if that's not how your wife is, then don't try to make that a new thing. But you find out what she likes. And she mentioned earlier she was so musical. I am opposite of that. I am a musical, right? No time. I really am not even quite tone deaf, but still, we've gone to various musicals and we've seen them, and I've been able to appreciate elements that maybe she doesn't. And it's not the soaring music and the emotional impact. It's more like, I don't know, I like the costumes, or I think that's an interesting, revolving stage they've got there. How did they engineer that? And I'm able to find things in those productions that intrigue me as well. So
instead of just being like, I'm not
going to go to that.
Yeah, but you can't appreciate what is good if you're focused on what is bad, I think is part of what you're saying. Like,
and it doesn't have to be the same part. Like I sing and I play the piano and I lead worship. He doesn't do any of that, but guess what? He loves to worship. So if I am going to go do that or guest lead somewhere, he will often come and just participate. So we're still participating together, even though it's in different ways at the same thing. So there's always a way to do it, and it's not as hard as it seems.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. I appreciate that, because it can feel daunting. So, but it doesn't need to be everything. It just needs to be one or two things that just neither of you mutually hate. It's kind of the feeling that I get from what you're saying, right? It's just like, just find something that neither one of you hate and just do that. And
I like setting the bar down there.
Yeah.
That's good.
Right.
What don't you hate? Yeah.
And it is. It's deciding on my part. This me who I created by age 30 or by age 40. How much of those things are really who I am, or are those just like sometimes that was just the path of least resistance, or I've just always done it that way? Yeah. How much am I willing to let go of? How much am I willing to change in order to honor and create a safer, more encouraging, more productive relationship with my wife, and give her what she needs? Because I don't want to get rid of everything. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like money. You make money, you figure out, okay, what's the least I can live on, and then maybe give away the stuff that you don't really need. And you have to decide that. Everybody has to decide that for themselves. What is it they need, and what is it that they can give away? And so, what is it that I need as my core me, and how much can I allow to adapt or drift away or become somewhat different so that I can honor this partnership?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, thanks so much, guys. I think that's really helpful. I love to see just the ways that you all have really, what you're talking about is we've learned to love in a way that we didn't expect that we needed to, but we have, by God's grace, and he's working in us, and he has worked in us, and we have learned to become actually just more loving than we would have been. So I love to see it. You guys are a ton of fun, and thank you so much for being here. So
Thank you
thank you.
for having us.